And welcome everyone to this Partners for Democracy special event. The URL that you see on our graphic is to our website, which you can go to throughout the evening to contribute to the actions and efforts of the groups we will be profiling this evening, and we hope you do. And greetings, everyone. I'm Jim Trengrove. Thank you for joining us. In political circles, Michigan and Wisconsin, along with Pennsylvania, make up what is known as the Blue Wall. Three states President Joe Biden almost certainly must win to ensure his reelection. We profiled the Pennsylvania Battleground in our special event on April 1st, and you can find that recording on our website under live events. Tonight, we'll focus on Michigan and Wisconsin. Donald Trump won both states very narrowly in 2016. Joe Biden won them in 2020 by equally narrow margins. We're going to explore what it's going to take for the President Biden to win those states again, what has changed since 2020, and what could change before the votes are cast. We're going to do that with Ben Winkler. He's the chairman of the Wisconsin Democratic Party, and with Amy Chapman, considered one of the foremost Democratic strategists in Michigan. She also heads the Michigan Donor Fund, which you'll learn more about. We'll also go inside the work of two groups actively engaged in driving out the vote in those two states, Michigan Voices and the Milwaukee-based Souls to the Polls. A couple of quick notes. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. This event also is being recorded. And one other note, as you probably know, the Supreme Court tomorrow will consider and hopefully decide soon whether the President of the United States has absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. The case is rooted in the criminal indictment against Donald Trump for trying to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Special prosecutor Jack Smith urged all Americans to read the indictment to understand the magnitude of the charges. If you haven't read it, 83 Americans did at our request on camera. You can watch and listen to this significant event by going to our Read the Indictment page, and the link is now in the chat. So let's begin with Ben Winkler. Ben, thank you for joining us this evening. Is the Wisconsin portion of the Blue Wall going to stand, and what needs to be done to make sure that happens?
Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much to all of the Partners for Democracy on this call. It's an honor to be with you alongside my friends from Soul to the Polls, Wisconsin, and Michigan Voices, and Amy Chapman. It's good to see you here. This is one of those moments that will determine the fate of American democracy, and you're zeroed in on the states where that future will be decided. And Wisconsin is perpetually perched on a knife's edge. We are the only state where 4 of the last 6 presidential elections has come down to less than 1 percentage point. It was 0.7 of a point in 2016 for Trump, 0.6 of a point for Biden in 2020. And to be specific, that means 20,682 votes in our state. That is 2 votes per precinct, or between 2 and 3 votes per precinct, depending on the number of precincts that open up across the state of Wisconsin. A couple people in every neighborhood determine the tipping point state in the Electoral College. So you have to win Wisconsin and you have to win Michigan if you want to reelect President Biden. And it means that voters in these states have these extraordinarily powerful ballots. They can determine the fate of American democracy. It means that the organizers and the get out the vote work in these states has this massively outsized impact. And all of that means in turn that you on this Zoom right now with your donations to support work that happens in these states can have really a bigger effect on the future of our whole country than most people in American history have ever had the opportunity to have. It comes down to a hair's breadth. The good news that I want to share tonight is that because of work that so many people on this call have supported, that Souls to the Polls has helped to power, that the Democratic Party of Wisconsin has been right in the middle of over these last several years, we are very confident that if we win this election, it will stay won. And to explain why that's so significant and what I mean by that, I want to go back in time a little bit and set us up for this moment, and then I want to answer any questions folks might have before I turn it back over. So in 2020, we had this enormous task because Republicans have rigged Wisconsin to make it hard for Democrats to win. They've smashed unions. We've had the biggest decline in union density of any state in the country this century. They have rigged our voting rules so that it is harder to cast a ballot here. We're the second hardest state to register to vote in the nation and the fourth hardest state to cast a ballot. They gerrymandered our state to high heaven. We had the most aggressive partisan gerrymander in the country in Wisconsin. And amidst all of that, we had Supreme Court decisions over and over that were overriding citizens' voting rights. So when we got to 2020, we had to try to overcome all of that in the middle of a pandemic, and it just barely worked. But we won by less than 1%, which meant that Republicans had the legal right to call for a recount. They called for a recount only in our two biggest and most diverse counties, in Milwaukee County and Dane County, where Madison's located. And then they tried to throw out hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots that they knew were most likely Democratic votes. It went to our state Supreme Court. And on the state Supreme Court at that time, there were 3 progressives who all voted against Trump's petition and 4 conservatives. And one of the conservatives said that Trump had waited until after he knew that he'd lost, knew the election result, to challenge those ballots. And so he sided with the progressives. And by a single vote on our state Supreme Court, we prevented the election from being overturned. Now, what do you call a failed coup? You call it practice. Republicans realized pretty quickly that they just needed to contest the legitimacy of those votes before the election results were called. In 2020, they sued before the election, and they were able to eliminate all absentee ballot drop boxes in the state and make it illegal to return someone else's absentee ballot. I've spoken on election days to family members who were holding a father holding his daughter's absentee ballot while she was across the state at a 24-hour nursing shift. He couldn't turn in her ballot. She was disenfranchised by that ruling. But we went to work. And since that 2020 election, we flipped the majority on their state Supreme Court, meaning our state Supreme Court will not overturn the election result, will not invalidate massive numbers of ballots, will not put up additional hurdles for people to be able to go and cast their votes. We've been able to win local elections. We worked on hundreds of them every spring. This spring, it was 287 local races. We won 63% of them on the night that Donald Trump was back in our state for the first time since the midterm elections. On April 2nd this spring, he came to Green Bay, told his supporters to vote. They had city council elections that night, but we won by 15 votes and got a progressive majority on their city council, which means in the local government offices that oversee election administration in our state, the Republicans won't be able to rig the system. And the third tier of the Republican strategy has been to flood poll workers in to try to make sure that people hostile to democracy actually were administering the election in local precincts. But through intensive year-round organizing by the Democratic Party and our partners, we've been able to register, train, and send in poll workers who believe in democracy to ensure that we could counter that right-wing threat, people who believe that every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot. And amidst all that, after Republicans tried to get supermajorities in the state legislature to overcome Governor Evers' veto so they could rig our state election system, we won the Supreme Court majority, and the majority fought back a impeachment threat by the far right and struck down the gerrymandered maps, which means that for this November's election, we'll have fair maps for our state legislature for the first time in 14 years. And that means there's a new birth of energy and enthusiasm, of vitality, of focus on winning local elections all across the state that will help turn out voters that will help us to win the presidential election. It's an extraordinary moment, both of enormous peril, because Trump is promising a dictatorship on day one if he wins his election, but also enormous promise to reelect Tammy Baldwin, to flip House seats and win the House majority, and potentially to win the state assembly in Wisconsin in a way that would have been unimaginable just a year ago, but now is possible because people dedicated to democracy have poured themselves into this fight. And I know so many people on this Zoom have been a part of that. So at this moment, with the entire presidential election hanging in the balance on this tiny number of voters in this very small number of states, with your support, we have a chance not only to defeat Trump and not only to potentially build a Democratic trifecta at the federal level, but to break the Republican stranglehold on Wisconsin that has made us such a closely divided state, even though most people in Wisconsin are part of the anti-MAGA majority that wants to move our politics towards freedom and decency and democracy and common sense. So this moment is it. And before I open it up, I just want to share one other piece. This is a use it or lose it proposition. not just because Trump is talking about dismantling our democracy if he takes control, but also because in our state, we have this insidious voter suppression law, voter ID law that Republicans passed in 2011. The Republicans have realized that the only way they can guarantee that this law stays on the books and keeps shutting voters out is by putting it into our state constitution. And in Wisconsin, voters can't put things directly onto the ballot to get into the Constitution. It takes passage through back to back sessions of the state legislature. And last session, they passed the voter ID law through the legislature on its way to becoming a constitutional amendment. If we don't win the state assembly in this election cycle, then they could pass it through the legislature again and encode voter suppression into the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin, which was the birthplace of the progressive movement. If we win the state assembly, they cannot do this. And we have a chance to make Wisconsin, like our friends in Michigan did, one of the most pro-voter states in the United States of America, make it a state we hope that you won't have to worry about on election night, where you won't have to stay up all night waiting for the returns to be counted. We know Republicans are still bent on dismantling our democracy, but for the first time in a long time, there's hope that we can actually move it in the other direction. And what we do over these next 6 months will determine which of those paths we take over the edge of the abyss or up towards the mountaintop. And your help can help us to get there. So, for all those reasons, I'm so profoundly grateful for everyone's support. I'm so fired up about the work. We have volunteers who are organizing every weekend across our state. There's energy here, but we need your help to be able to win. So, with that, I'd love to open it up, take any quick questions, and then turn it back over.
Well, Ben, let me ask you about the state Supreme Court. Last year, we had you on here right before the pivotal state Supreme Court elections, which put the progressive on the tilt the balance. It got nationwide attendance, really pulled out a lot of voters. You got two elections this year, isn't that correct? You have one of the progressives retiring, and there's one an open seat. Or straighten me out on that, if you would.
So this spring, we did not have a Supreme Court race, but our longest serving justice, who's been on the court for 30 years, announced recently, just in the last couple of weeks, that she will not seek re-election in 2025. So next year, we will have a state Supreme Court election that will determine the majority because it's a progressive who's stepping down. If we lose the former Republican Attorney General under Scott Walker, a guy named Brad Schimmel, he's running, he's a straight up partisan right-wing extremist. He would roll back all of the progress that's been made. If the progressive candidate wins, and so far I know there are candidates who are preparing or thinking it through. I'm confident we'll have a candidate not too long from now. If that person wins, then we have every opportunity not just to have another year, but the next several elections after that are conservatives who'd be up for re-election. So we could actually expand our majority and get off the edge of the abyss. But the 2025 Supreme Court election is critical. The other thing I'll say about this is that right now, because we won the state Supreme Court race, the right, the freedom of Wisconsinites to access an abortion is protected. A lower court has said that the 19th century abortion ban in Wisconsin is now unenforceable. If that reaches the Supreme Court, I'm confident that they will actually read the laws and conclude the same thing. But because there's an open seat on our state Supreme Court next year, it is now very clear to people paying attention that the freedom to access abortion care is hanging by a thread. And because of that, we have a huge opportunity to make the case to voters that we need federal protections. So you should vote for Democrats for House and Senate and for Biden and Harris, and that we need protections in our state. So you should vote for Democrats for the state legislature. This issue is so relevant and live for voters here because if you go back, a year from right now, you could not access an abortion in the state, and there are horror stories all over Wisconsin about what that meant. So the number one issue for persuadable voters in this election is very clearly on the ballot this fall, and that's because it'll be on the ballot again in the spring. We're one bad election away from a statewide abortion ban right now.
I want to ask you about the polling. I know we hear of the polling, and some of us tend to dismiss it as still being early. That it's still several months to go before people are focused. What are you hearing? Are the issues certainly reproductive rights? I would imagine that Joe Biden's age has sort of fallen off a little bit since his performance at the State of the Union address. But then also the sort of the protest vote, in the April 2nd primary, 8.6% against Joe Biden as a result of the humanitarian concerns in Gaza. How do you address those?
Yeah, so I'll take the second part first. we had a Listen to Wisconsin movement in our primary, asking people to vote uninstructed on their primary ballot. And the organizers of that movement have been very clear publicly. They're trying to send a message about policy change and a change on the ground that they want to see in Gaza. They're not saying they want Trump instead of Biden, or that Biden should lose the election. And I know the president is working to reach a just and enduring peace that provides for safety and security and freedom and self-determination for Israelis and Palestinians alike. That is really the focus of that moment. And of course, it's going to be an issue as the situation unfolds. On the Republican side, a far higher share of the voters, 12.8%, voted for Nikki Haley in the primary. There were 124,000 votes for candidates other than Trump in the Republican primary here. And those voters were not calling for one policy change from their nominee. They were calling for someone else. They were against Trump in that election. And we know from our research that a ton of those voters are potentially accessible to Biden, as well as a ton of voters who voted uninstructed. There's an opportunity to build a big tent that believes in democracy and justice and freedom in the US and around the world. And that's the work that we're undertaking now, making sure that we're listening to people, that we're connecting, and that we're both making sure that people are heard now and making sure that people see the choice that they're going to face as we move towards November. And so that's what we can see in the polling, is that there are a lot of voters who don't know who they're supporting. There are a ton of people thinking about RFK right now who have no idea how absolutely terrible his policies are on a whole range of different things. He's a kind of a vessel right now for people saying general discontent, but we want to make sure that he's a vivid, specific candidate who actually represents his really extreme and hideous positions as we get towards the fall. And we have this enormous opportunity to make the case to people that Biden actually shares their values and is making progress. To give one example, President Biden signed the biggest investment in climate action in American history into law, and only 10% of voters know anything about it. So there's this huge opportunity to make sure to connect with voters who care about climate change, that we have this enormous progress because of Biden. Things are moving finally in the right direction, and Trump wants to repeal all of it. He wants to make us a fossil fuel only economy. There's what we can see in our research is that there's a dearth of information because people aren't tuning in. And when people get the information and see President Biden in action and see Trump in action, that it moves the needle substantially. And that's why, in some sense, I'm excited that the Republican National Convention's in Wisconsin in July. Republicans think it'll help them. I think the more people see of Trump, the more they dislike him. And I'm excited that the Democratic convention's in Chicago next door in August. We're really going to draw a contrast between the two sides. And what many different types of research show us is that this election is up for grabs.
Ben, I'll let you go on two quick questions that we're getting in the chat. One is about third-party candidates, Jill Stein, Green Party, concerns about that. And the other is, what can out-of-state voters do to support the effort in Wisconsin?
Two great questions. So first, on the third-party vote, my job is to sweat everything. So I will absolutely say we need to not pretend that there is no third party situation happening, especially with RFK. The critical thing is to not just ignore him. It is to make sure that voters know what he stands for, what he's trying to do, who's backing him. He's essentially backed by Trump's biggest donors, and he is running on a conspiracy theory platform. If we do that education, I think we can make sure that for voters who would either consider Biden or RFK, they choose Biden. And frankly, some Trump voters might find that RFK is a better match for them, especially on things like the extreme anti-vaccine conspiracy theories. For Jill Stein voters, again, the climate, the information about what Biden has done on climate is actually game changing, but people don't know it right now. So we're taking all of these different pieces seriously. But that's where you can help. So everyone on this call, I want to emphasize, it does make a huge difference to donate now. Your support, especially early in this election, helps us to build out the team that can then make sure that every dollar at the final stretch is spent in the most efficient way possible. And secondly, volunteering, especially starting early, it makes a huge difference too. Someone shared in the chat, they were making phone calls to Wisconsin by the end of the election in 2020. People were sick of hearing from us. We were only virtual in that election. Wisconsin had the third biggest COVID outbreak in the country, second only to the Dakotas, because the right-wing Supreme Court had knocked out every COVID containment measure in our state after a right-wing lawsuit. But in this moment, we're back out knocking on doors, which means that in-state volunteers, of which most of our volunteers are in Wisconsin, will be out in the streets. They'll be talking to friends and family. They'll be going to events, and they'll be knocking on doors neighborhood to neighborhood, which means that out-of-state volunteers can call the voters who just need a little reminder to vote, and they will not be saturated with the same dozens of calls that they had in 2020. We have an opportunity to spread our efforts across all the different tactics that add up to victory together. So we would love for folks out of state to donate, to travel to Wisconsin, but also to join our virtual phone banks and our voter protection virtual phone operation, which makes an enormous difference in making sure that everyone who's eligible and ready to support President Biden casts a ballot this fall. And by the way, helps us to reelect Tammy Baldwin and do the down ballot work at the same time. And with that, thank you so much. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I really appreciate it. There was one other question. Actually, I'm going to use it for Reverend Greg Lewis. It's about how to attract people of color. So good luck to you, and hopefully we can be in touch before Election Day.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Reverend Greg Lewis, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having us.
So we did get a question here about getting people of color more involved. Do you have any concerns? We've been hearing anecdotal information about young Black men not being very engaged this time around, how to get them enthused. What has Souls to the Polls been doing to get out the vote once again?
Well, concerning that, we specifically have organized a group, and we're organizing 1,000 Black men to operate in this season to get out the vote. As a matter of fact, we certainly have heard those stories, and I just I don't know who's telling those stories, but people they can say what they want to say, and first thing you got to do in our community is let somebody know there's going to be a vote. I mean, all that kind of threatening about somebody's going to support, I don't even think about that, because, I remember last presidential election, we were accused of having people cheat in voting. And I told them, I said, look, man, I wish that were true, because we can't even get people to vote once, let alone get them to vote twice. So, I'm like, I hear all that kind of stuff, but I'm in the community and I see what's going on. And most people are just very, very dissatisfied with the way the other team is operating. So I'll just say that. And we just have to keep encouraging and let them know that there's a vote. A lot of people walk down the street in the community, they don't even know that there is a vote coming. And our biggest job is to let people know that we are going to vote and that you have power. And most of the time, they don't even understand the power they have. If people aren't voting, then your power is enormously increased, because now your vote is very much more important. So, we just continue to do the work. There's no easy way out. First of all, Jim, you got to keep doing the work, and over and over and over again. You have to keep delivering the messages, and that is something that is not going to change, at least not in my lifetime.
All right, Reverend Lewis, we've had you on before. We enjoyed having you on. You do have a short presentation, if you want to go into that, to show the actual work that Souls to the Poll has been doing.
Yeah, well, I hope I can do this, because I'm not good at presentations, but I'm going to try here. Listen, I really wanted to talk about some of the things that we've been very successful at, and we're going to continue to do. In 2020 and 2022 elections, we knocked on doors everywhere, 30,000 homes, and we contacted 32,000 individuals, and we had a reach of 2 million on our digital outreach. That turnout was 78%. And people keep talking about people aren't coming out to vote, but we had 78% of these people coming out to vote. And what I'm really proud of is that we increased the early voting, and that's where we really hit them hard. The early voting was increased by 50%, because we really push early voting. As a matter of fact, we push early voting so hard that we had a polling place, an early voting polling place that was the most potent early voting polling place in the Midwest, right here in Milwaukee. It was called Midtown. They shut it down. And we couldn't find out why they did it, but they said somebody bought it. They didn't want it there anymore, some nonsense. But we had to fight to get another early voting polling place in that area just so we could continue to be the most potent early voting site in this region. That was huge. And we're certainly organizing other organizations. We've organized 44 organizations doing advocacy and organizing to get out to vote. And we are also perfectly and intentionally targeting 100,000 voters to make sure that we can get at least what we say in our slogan: we're an army of faith, the power of 100,000 souls to the polls. So we're targeting 100,000 voters specifically just to make sure that we ask them to come out and vote. And, you know, speaking about the Black men, we've already organized this 1,000 Black Men initiative. And we've started doing that about 3 months ago, and it's really going strong right now. And on top of that, we have this 100 Women on the Move initiative that well, actually, let me be specific: 100 Black Men initiative and 100 Women on the Move initiative that we're really, really putting a whole lot of work in to make sure that we get volunteers and folks to really push getting out to vote for August and November. And one of the huge things that we like to do is early vote Sunday. Not just so we can say that people came out and voted on Sunday, but the community needs to see us coming out and voting early. Because if you look at what happened in Wisconsin, and Mr. Winkler did a great job explaining everything. I don't know why I have to say anything. I should have just said amen to everything he said. But we had at this one Midtown early voting center 18,500 votes. The president won the election by 20,000 votes. We are certainly powerful in the state of Wisconsin. Now, that means this, that our brothers and sisters, our white brothers and sisters, are split right down the middle, and we make the difference. We just have to keep working hard to get these people out to vote. And the work can't stop now, and it didn't just start now, because we work year-round identifying and training new leaders. You know, we're trying to build a block of voters that come out and they vote all the time. And not just voting, but we talk about housing and racism and segregation and education and economics and gun violence and, of course, voting. So we're always working 365 days a year. And our base is the faith community, you know, because we know that if we can go in where these people are voting and then make sure that everyone votes there and then come out into community and get those folks around these churches and friends and relatives, all these people to come out and vote. Also, I think that's why we have been very, very successful, even in increasing local elections. The last local election we had, it's usually, we have a sorry turnout, 8%, 11% in local elections. That's just pitiful. But this time we really pushed a little bit, and we had 30% turnout in local elections. But that is so encouraging for us, because people don't come out in these local elections in our community, but they came out even in the rain, and that was just great. Now, the faith community and Black and brown community, we have our hands all in those communities, and we are pushing and we are making sure that they understand that there's a vote in August and there's a vote in November. And the reason I keep repeating that is because, you know, we don't want to get so sophisticated and start talking about other things when the first thing we need to talk about is letting these people know there's a vote. We got people running around, and if you ask them the question, hey man, are you going to vote? They say, well, what you talking about? Is there a vote? No, I'm not voting. Well, we make sure that they understand that there's a vote and we have to be involved. Now, the the one thing that we really have put a lot of stock in is something we call vote tripling. We're asking everybody who's already energized about voting, man, you got to take 3 people with you. Take 3 people with you. Take 2 people with you. Take somebody with you when you go vote, because we think these personal relationships and these groundswells have really been beneficial for us getting out the vote efforts. And, we have to talk about living wages and housing and Social Security and Medicare. And we have to really push these people to understand that you got to have a voice if you don't want these things to come down in a negative way for you and your family and grandparents and all those kind of things. So we have really, really been fighting hard to make sure that people use their voices to get other people to go to the polls. And that's something we try to do all the time, but we're really putting a significant amount of energy into that this time because it worked so well when we did it in 22, when the Supreme Court justice race was in Wisconsin. And we certainly are so very pleased that we got a new Supreme Court justice, but that took a lot of work, and we want to continue in that work. Now, this vote tripling is something that I think, people are going to be surprised how much that will help us. And there's another program called Postcard Program, where we can give folks this postcard application, and they can use their phones to send hundreds of postcards to friends and neighbors to remind them about the vote. Now, remember, in our community, we just need people to understand that there's a vote coming. And that's what we're doing with the postcard program. And we're trying to target at least 20,000 infrequent voters. And that's purposely. We want to make sure that we get these people to understand how important they are. I think they're most important. They're the most important people in this election, because we have to get them to the polls, because it was such a slim margin that we won the last time. And we certainly are doing leadership training, teaching people how to go in and register for themselves. And our digital infrastructure is next to none. We really do digital infrastructure like nobody else. And I have to thank my friends out in New Jersey who really help us with our digital infrastructure. And we have this new Capitol Voting Center. It's called the Capitol Drive Voting Center because they closed the most potent voting center in the Midwest. So we have this new center, and we're going to make that a voters hub. We want to do trainings. We want to do all type of events. We want to have rallies, press conferences. We want to use that place for 2 reasons. Because for one thing, people need to know there's a new place. There's a new sheriff in town. It's called the Capitol Drive Voting Center. That's where you go now. We got to make that the biggest early voting center here in the Midwest. And we also do the canvassing, knocking on doors. I told you, 30,000 homes, knocking on these doors, making sure they understand that they are important, they are needed, and we need folks to understand their power. Now, the biggest fight we have right now in Wisconsin is drop boxes. See, drop boxes are so important, and people really don't understand them. We have to educate folks about these drop boxes. Back in in the 20 election, COVID was here. I almost died of COVID. I think I've told this story before. But why, I was sick, we were suing the state election commission to change the date for voting. And we didn't win that change of date, but what we did win is to count 38,000 absentee ballots that didn't make it to the polls in time. And that pushed a Supreme Court justice that we would support. Well, we can't really support anybody because we're nonpartisan, but that pushed this Supreme Court justice over the top. And if that hadn't have happened, this Supreme Court would not be leaning towards the ideas, opinions, and help that they could give my community right now. So that was huge. But during that work, we had to make sure, and by no uncertain terms, that people understood that even though we were sick, I was in the hospital, they told me I was dying, and I told them that's okay. Give me my phone, because before before I'm eliminated from this earth, I'll be working until the end. So that is what we have to show people when we're doing this work out here in the field, that nothing should stop us. We're working on voter registration, phone banking, and of course, fundraising. We always have to do that because we need good people to try to get this work done. And we're always recruiting volunteers, whether they're in state or not. And the biggest program we have on voting day is Rides to the Poll. Now, we just believe that we always have to make sure we extend an invitation to all the elderly in this state to understand what's at stake if we don't get out and vote. So for the most part, we try to make that difference up with the people who are divided right down the middle, and we've done a great job. I don't think we've lost an election yet. I just believe that if we continue to work as hard as we do, that we'll continue to win in 2024. And there's no replacement for hard work. I just want to thank you guys for even having us here. I mean, and I'm tired, man. You're in my bedtime now. I usually go to bed at about 6:30, 7 o'clock, because I get up early in the morning to get things going for the day.
Reverend
And
Lewis,
thank you so much.
let me ask you a quick question. We did get a question about the ride to the polls and expanding that. And
Yes.
Can you expand it farther out into the state, and how can volunteers help with that?
We have not done that thus far, and that's a good question. And maybe we need to brainstorm on how we can do that. But we have had people who have been willing to volunteer to do it all over the state. And if we did that all over the state, it would be a tremendous, tremendous help to folks who really can't get to the polls.
Right. Okay. Reverend Lewis, I'll let you go to bed. And I'm glad you're still with us. And thank you so much. We hope to be in touch. Maybe we can get out to Wisconsin and see some of the work you're doing. Maybe capture it on film and put something together for you.
Please
right.
come and be with us.
All right. Have a good evening. Thank you so much.
You.
I want to turn now to Amy Chapman. Amy is a Democratic strategist in Michigan, also the head of the Michigan Donor Fund. But Amy, let me ask you about the landscape in Michigan right now. On how are you seeing it? You seeing similarities to Wisconsin? Anything peculiar about Michigan?
Well, a couple of things. The other is that given that I want to be respectful of folks' time, maybe Summer and I can just do questions and you can give out our slides afterwards.
Okay.
We can cover our stuff in terms of our answers.
That's fine.
A couple of things. When I heard the term blue wall, like a shiver came up my spine, because I feel like folks on our side tend to be like, you won, so now we don't have to worry about you anymore. And, to quote the great political strategist William Shakespeare, what's past is prologue. All it does is take a look at 2016, where 225,000 people voted third party, 85,000 people left the top of the ticket blank, voted the rest of the time, left the top of it blank, and then Trump won by 10,700 votes. There was a great bounce back by now President Biden, winning by 150,000 votes, so more than narrow. But you can't take this stuff for granted. And I know that the president's not taking it for granted. And I know the work from C3 groups and organizations like Summer isn't taking it for granted. Her running Michigan Voices is critical to what's going to happen here in the fall. And the work that we do on the independent expenditure side is going to really move forward and fill gaps and innovate and reach out to help boost the progressive infrastructure, and also groups on the ground that are doing the work year in, year out. Because you can't just do this 5 minutes before an election and think that voters are going to be grateful that somehow you showed up. Like, that's not how it works. And we're lucky to have a strong party like they have in Wisconsin. Lavora Barnes, first African-American woman to run the state party in Michigan, and she's been in there since 18. which was also a great victory year. So I got to hand it to Lavora. And in the last election, we got a trifecta, or as we call it, an allfecta. Our amazing governor got reelected. Our amazing AG got reelected. Our amazing Secretary of State got reelected. We kept a majority on the state Supreme Court, and we were able to win the state House and state Senate by 1 seat because of fair maps, because of community groups putting an independent commission on the ballot, having that win. And this was the first time there were, I guess I would call them fairer maps, but fairer maps. And we were able to get that done. And because of that, things really changed here in Michigan. And because that, I am optimistic about this fall, but we can't take anything for granted. And, I would not be me if I wasn't nervous about a number of things right now that are going on in the state that make me concerned.
Well,
About-
let me ask you one of them. You talked, there were 100,000 uncommitted votes for Joe Biden in the primary because of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Do you have concern that a lot of those folks won't come back?
No, I don't, because both Summer and I talked to these folks. I think one of the things that's important to know is that we have a large Arab and Muslim population in Michigan, but the largest number of Muslims in Michigan are actually Black Muslims, not Arab. And these are groups that the Republican Party has been targeting year in, year out for a number of years. I mean, pre-Gaza attack, town of Hamtramck, Muslim mayor, Muslim city council banned the gay pride flag. There's been a lot of infiltration by the right in terms of that. Now, that's a group that's doing all the abandoned Biden. That is not the same as the folks who are uncommitted. Similar to what Chairman Winkley said, these are people who want to send a message in conversations with them. We've done work with them a tremendous amount. A lot of them are our grantees. They work with Summer. They work with other folks. These are not folks who want Trump to win, but they have a strong and serious concern about what is happening in the Middle East. And I am hopeful that with some sort of policy work that's being done by the White House, there will be something that folks will feel comfortable coming back around on. But I am also nervous that not everyone's coming back. And a part of it depends on what the it is. I'm not a policy person, not going to lie. And when the it happens, and that gives me some concern. I don't know, Summer, if you want to hop in for a minute.
Yeah, Amy, what I want you to do is quickly describe in a thumbnail what Michigan Donor Alliance does and how that relates to the work that Summer is doing at the Michigan Voices.
Well, I'm sure you'll get the PowerPoint afterwards, but the Michigan Donor Alliance has been around since 2011. We have 100 members in Michigan and nationally, and we support progressive infrastructure, innovate, and fill gaps. And the progressive infrastructure we support includes the C3 table, which Summer runs and supports the work of the nonprofits there. We also have a great C4 collaborative, America Votes, and we support their work. We have a communications hub. We have a polling consortium. We have all sorts of work that can be helpful to people on the candidate and party side, but also very helpful to folks on the independent side. And in the last election cycle, between our C3 pooled fund, our C4 pooled fund, and donor-directed work, we were able to move $300 million and $300 million. $38 million. I wish it was 300 million, then we win everything. 38 million in the 2022 cycle. To these programs and to this work. And I have been doing it. I've been doing it for a long time. And before that, I ran campaigns. I've run nonprofits. I worked with Bruce Coburn at the AFL-CIO. I've worked with SEIU, AFSCME. I ran my own data and analytics firm for a number of years and have run campaigns. I was the Obama state director here in 2008 and did a lot of work in other states in the 90s before I came to Michigan. So that's my background and work. I hope that's enough, Jim.
Oh, sure. And how do you? Well, let's go to Summer Foster then. You've heard her mentioned several times. Summer, how are you? Thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit about Michigan Voices first, and then we'll get into some issues.
Sure. So my name is Summer Foster. I am the executive director of Michigan Voices. As Amy mentioned, Michigan Voices is the nonprofit 501c3 coordinating and coordinating table in Michigan. We are a grassroots organization that works with partners that are mostly led by that engaged communities of color. We have 135 partners across the state of Michigan. We are a statewide organization. We do work to support pro-equity, pro-democracy campaigns and organizing. We do voter registration, get out the vote work, absentee voter chase. This year, we are going to be really focused on signing people up for the permanent absentee voter list. We help lead our election protection in state along with organizations like Promote the Vote. We do issue advocacy mostly around democracy and reproductive justice issues. And we do a lot of voter education work. And so we work quite closely with Amy in 2022. We were on the steering committee of the Reproductive Freedom for All campaign. And I think we spent about $4 million in the 2022 election.
Mm-hmm. And, we had one question, Summer, about, what do you say to Black voters who have traditionally voted Democrat, and their lives just don't seem to get any better? And maybe they're thinking, should I look somewhere else? Should I sit this out? What sort of encouragement can you give them?
Sure. So I have been doing this work, political work. I say I started organizing at 13 years old, but really my first job was about 20 years ago. And I've looked at the landscape and I have paid attention to this president and this administration and how he reaches out to community and gets feedback from community on how things are going. And I've never seen a president do that with grassroots organizations before. And they started doing that back in 2021, soon after President Biden got elected. And so I think that's an important story to tell people, that the president really does care about the grassroots and listens to the grassroots and wants to hear what they have to say. And some of the folks that I know have been on those calls with the White House have been able to have uncomfortable and truthful conversations, but they felt comfortable doing that. And I think that's an important thing. And I think the other thing that we always try to stress is like, who do you want to organize around, right? Because we are organizers at heart. And so do you want to organize somebody who agrees with you 80% of the time, or do you want to organize against somebody that wants you to cease to exist? And so I think that's the question that we have with a lot of people, is like with President Biden, he may not do all of the things. The Democratic Party may not do all of the things. Progressives may not do all of the things that they campaign and say that they're going to do. But you can have a conversation with there and you can see a trajectory to a win. Whereas if you have someone in the White House that wants to destroy democracy, I don't know how you get there, right? So in Michigan, if I look back at 2010, Michigan was a mess, right? Or 2012, Michigan was a mess. We just repealed right to work. We had emergency management. We were passing strict abortion laws. And I look at how things have changed in Michigan over the last 10 years or so. We have made quite a bit of progress. And that's because we've been able to organize and stick together as a coalition and build a multiracial coalition that matters.
Amy, let's talk a little bit about what we talked about on the phone last week on the changing face of Michigan, on how people have a misconception that most of the vote is coming out of Detroit, and that the rest of the state is rural, but there's been population shifts. So Amy, talk a little bit about that, about the voters, the rural voters, Black rural voters.
No, absolutely. When I started doing campaigns here in the mid-90s, it was very much the UAW and Detroit, and you win. And those two constituencies are extremely important now. A third of voters in Michigan, if you ask them if they are union members, former union members, or from a union household, would say yes. So that's a big constituency. But in terms of where the state is, according to the last census, Michigan is now 72% white, down from 76% white, but still majority white. However, Detroit and other places have shrunk in terms of the population, but people have moved to other parts of the state. So the state is becoming more diverse, even though the city of Detroit is a smaller yet important voting bloc. Currently, about 8% of the vote in the state comes from Detroit. So it's an important 8%, but it is not the only thing. And there are 17 counties in the state that have 70 to 75% of the vote, and we focus on those. We don't ignore the rest, but we certainly focus on those. There's a growing Latinx population, especially in the western part of the state, and we've done a lot of work with the Farm Workers Union and with other folks there in the agricultural businesses. And there's a huge AAPI population. Actually, the largest group of Asian Pacific Islander voters in the state are actually Indian, then Chinese, then Filipino. There was a special election here, and a Vietnamese refugee woman just won and is now in the state legislature. So the rural areas are important, and we do work in them, and they've become more diverse. Indigenous people, there's 12 tribes that are represented, not just on reservations in the state. And then there's a large Arab and Muslim population that's a little bit hard to quantify because there's no question on the census about that. But there is no one silver bullet that if you do this one thing, then you win the election. And I think that's the challenge. I think folks sometimes are looking for, like, what's the one thing? And there is no one thing. And I'm going to there was a question about the UAW, and I'm
Yeah, I was
going
going to
to
ask you.
answer that. I'm going to answer that as a part of it. There has been new leadership with the UAW, and that has only strengthened what's been happening with the labor movement here. But also steel workers, building trades today endorsed President Biden, Teamsters, carpenters. There's a lot of different groups right now that are doing whatever they can to support the top of the ticket, because there is so much of a difference. I mean, Biden walking a picket line versus Trump going to a non-union parts factory on the same day. I mean, you couldn't get more stark than that. So when I worked for the AFL-CIO a long time ago, the UAW had a great program in terms of reaching out to their members, and UAW members, in fact, were the highest performing in the labor movement. And they are moving back in that direction, and we're excited because member to member is the best way in terms of convincing folks to vote for a candidate.
Mhm. Okay, go ahead.
Jim, I also want to mention the other
Yeah.
things on the ballot for a minute, because
Well, you've got a retiring senator, and you've got 2 House seats that'll be vacated, one by Alyssa Slotkin, who's running for Senate.
and one by Dan
Dan
Kildee.
Kildee, right.
And and we have a late primary, first week of August. There is primary in the Senate race right now and in one of the 2 congressionals. And in the Flint and Saginaw area, which is Kildee's open seat, that is an area that has been trending less Democratic. It used to be a strong Democratic stronghold. It is not any longer. A lot of a city like Grand Rapids, which used to be a stronghold for the Republicans, is actually right now a stronghold for Democrats. So that's another thing in terms of shifting on that. And then I want to bring up our state Senate is not up, but our state House is, and we have a 1-seat majority. And then our state Supreme Court, we have a progressive majority on. State Supreme Court is on the nonpartisan ballot. And our biggest challenge, and one of the areas that Summer in particular and her groups have been so supportive of, is reminding people to not forget the nonpartisan ballot. We are in a position right now to try and elect the first African-American woman to the state Supreme Court in Michigan to a full term and pick up an open seat. And if we do that, progressives will have control over the next decade of the state Supreme Court. So those are things that are very important to us in terms of the ballot that we're looking at. And we always like to go for the whole ballot, not just the top. I'm not one of those people that thinks that if you vote the top, then everything else comes along. It's like every level of the ballot for themselves.
Right. Summer,
Can I just add one
Sure,
thing
go
to
ahead.
that? There are, what was it, Amy? 1 million people that voted or for the top of the ticket in 2022 that did not vote for Supreme Court. And so we are doing a lot of work to do that down ballot education.
I just stop roll off.
Yep.
Summer, let me ask you, we'll get out on this question. If and we're encouraging people to go to our website, partnersfordemocracy.com. your links, the links to Souls to the Polls, Michigan Voices there. And also, Amy will try to get your slide deck up for Michigan Donor Alliance. But Summer, if people do donate, where's that money going to go to at this point?
So the best thing that you can do is invest in organizing early, because every election year we get money late and we have to scramble to see how we are going to best use it to turn out voters. And if we get money early enough, that is going to go directly into organizing. It's going to go directly into knocking on doors, making phone calls, and having conversations that we need to have repeatedly to make sure that we turn out voters, particularly people of color, particularly folks that are newly registered, and folks that are young voters and unmarried women. So that's what the money would go to, organizing.
Okay, all hands on deck.
All hands on deck.
All right. Thank you both for this evening, and thank you everyone for joining us. I want to go over to our founder, Ed Cohen, for some closing remarks. Ed?
Jim, thanks so much. And as always, you were able to generate a terrific conversation. I'm very energized by what's going on in these two really critical states. Ben and Reverend Lewis, thank you so much for the Badger State, and Amy and Summer, what's going on in Michigan. As a Badger myself, I'll just refer to you as Michigan, but both are very, very exciting places to be and to go, and you're doing great work. We have about 6.5 months to go until Election Day, and if anybody tells you that they know how it's going to come out, they're smoking something. There are just too many pieces right now, and we've been talking about them over the last couple of months. But I'll tell you this, I continue to believe that we have the better odds. The anti-Trump protest vote in the Republican Party is significant. 17% voted for Nikki Haley in Pennsylvania yesterday. It appears that RFK Jr. may be drawing more votes from Trump than Biden. Republicans are demonstrating in Congress that they can't be trusted to do the work of the nation, that they need to rely on Democrats to do what needs to be done. And while a solid third of the electorate probably doesn't care what happens in the Trump criminal trials, you're going to support him anyway, that means that 2/3 are watching. And it's going to have an effect. And the Biden record's a very strong one. We've discussed it before, but Heather Cox Richardson in the last couple days, pointed out some things that the president continues to do. In the course of 2 days, 2 rules affecting patients in nursing homes and receiving home care. A final rule that strengthens HIPAA medical privacy for people from states that ban abortions who seek reproductive health care in states that permit them. A new rule that would guarantee salary workers make more if they work overtime. And the FTC voted to ban non-compete agreements for 30 million workers. Now, all of this seems like little stuff, but it isn't. It affects people's lives. That's what this has in common. And it underscores the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden believes in the power and ability of government to improve the lives of individuals, and he cares about people. Donald Trump believes in the power and ability of government to pad the bank account of Donald J. Trump. Biden offers hope. Trump offers cynicism. I'd rather be peddling hope than peddling cynicism. We got a lot of work to do. We have to explain this to voters. You heard the comment, the point that only 10% of people who believe that climate change is an issue are aware of what Joe Biden did. And so that's why we need to continue to support these groups that are engaging in conversations with voters one-on-one, building relationships, educating voters, and encouraging them to get out and vote. So please, please contribute to these groups. We actually had a terrific month last month, our best month in terms of contributions. So I want to thank you. And for Wisconsin and Michigan, we need to keep the pedal to the metal. We have some volunteer opportunities on our website. Nancy Chasen will be organizing a postcard writing poll session. Her email address is in the chat. Please let her know if you're interested. And also go to our website where there's some other volunteer opportunities. And I want to reiterate Jim's reminder about our Read the Indictment initiative, which is on our website. It's going to be quite relevant to what the Supreme Court's looking at. Please go to the website to do that. Our next special event in the latter part of May will continue and conclude our programs on the target state